Hola, and welcome to Vive Nutrition Radio, the first ever Spanglish podcast where you will hear interviews with the top minds in nutrition, performance, fitness, and health in both English and Spanish. Here is your host, expert registered dietitian, Andres Ayesta, on a mission to help you take your nutrition to the next level. Hope you're ready for this. Let's dive right in.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to yet another episode of Vive Nutrition Radio. Today's episode is pretty exciting because we talked about this concept of nutrition hierarchy and nutrition periodization, which are two concepts you don't often hear in the nutrition world. And for that, I wanted to bring somebody that I've been following on Instagram for a while, and a lot of his circle of, friends and coaches and stuff like that are around him, because he is one smart cookie and he knows a lot about nutrition coaching and how to personalize nutrition very, very well. His name is Keto Diet. People call him Boom Boom, and that's actually where the name Boom Boom Performance came about. Boom Boom Performance and Nutrition is his company, and he's the founder and owner. And Cody has a really interesting story. He's actually very similar to mine. So he was a soccer player. Growing up, he tore his ACL at some point, just like I did, and eventually kind of started into getting into the fitness industry, and he did everything. We're talking about he practiced intermittent fasting when he was when that was not even a thing. He did bodybuilding shows, he did photo shoots, he did CrossFit competitively. He's done it all, and he knows everything from nutrition to training, and he's here to share some of his knowledge when it comes down to nutrition hierarchy. And essentially what nutrition hierarchy, just as a kind of like to open up this conversation, it's all about like different levels of areas that you need to cover to be able to have a full round nutrition program. And one of the really interesting things that we did is like we actually walked you through a person and what a typical year-long nutrition program would look like. Somebody, for example, like my ideal client would be Juan, and he is getting married at the end of the month, and we talked about what he would do for him to be able to get him to his goals. So I hope that you enjoy this awesome conversation that I had with Cody. And of course, if you have any questions at the end, there's a lot of different links that I'm going to make sure that I put on the show notes. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Cody. Here we go. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Vive Nutrition Radio. So today we have the pleasure of having, as I mentioned on the intro, a great colleague of mine. His name is Cody McBroom, and he is the founder of the Boom Boom Performance Systems, and he's also the host for, I think it's Boom Boom Performance or Boom Boom Podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, the Boom Boom Performance Podcast. I think everything is literally just boom boom, man.
Everything is boom boom. We'll get to that point, man. So welcome to the show, brother. How you doing?
Thank you, man. I'm doing really well. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome, dude. Yeah, so I figured, I'm sure that in a lot of the podcasts that you've actually gone on to, and I'm sure you talked a lot about this, so you're not going to get away with it. A lot of people ask you about where's the boom boom come from? and this is not going to be no exception. So where does that come from?
You know what's funny is I always go into them expecting it, and majority of people who interview me actually end up not asking me, and I actually get through the whole podcast, and I'm like, I'm surprised I didn't say anything. But it's not some crazy cool story as some people probably. I kind of like that there's a mystery behind it because it sounds worse than it is really, like the boom boom. But it's actually from soccer. So I grew up playing soccer. My brother was Vinny Boom Boom McBroom, and the announcer at our high school just one day randomly said Vinny Boom Boom McBroom. And then when I was in junior high, I actually made the varsity team. So I would take the bus over to the high school, and then we got to play together. So it was the Boom Boom Brothers. So it was Vinny and Cody Boom Boom, and it really just stuck. Like after high school, I actually ended up getting injured, and we can get into my story if you want. I got injured, gained weight, stopped playing soccer. And it wasn't until like years later when I was in the fitness space that somebody randomly called me Boom Boom. And I was like, oh shit, where did you hear that? And they were like, oh, it just came out. I've never heard it before. And then it just caught. And then I changed my name on social media, and it just kind of just took off from there.
And he rings, dude. I'm sure a lot of people like it because you're probably famous because of like that name because you're just perfect for it. So that's
you
really
know what's good. That's the good thing about it is nobody forgets it. So if I go to an event or I go speak or anything like that, people remember boom, boom. So it's a good way to get like, if you need a way to make sure people remember your face, just create a funny nickname for yourself and nobody will forget you.
That's awesome, man. Well, let's actually tie that into like your history and how you got into nutrition, because obviously you have a long trajectory of kind of where you're at right now. You have a very successful nutrition and training business. So what kind of led, obviously up until that, like, I guess from that moment that you were a soccer player to kind of lead into what you are here today?
Yeah, so my family was always, I always say I'm like kind of like the black sheep. Like my family was always very lean, very healthy, very in shape. And I was just randomly like a really, really chubby kid my entire life. It wasn't until, like I mentioned, freshman year, I kind of hit a growth spurt, got really into soccer, started playing on a couple different teams, indoor, outdoor club in high school. And I lost some weight, got lean, and I started really playing soccer. So for about 2 years in high school, I got lean enough to play, but I never stepped foot in the gym. I never really took care of my body. I didn't pay attention to nutrition. I was still eating like crap, like most kids do. And then junior year of high school, I tore my meniscus, stopped playing soccer, stopped skateboarding and snowboarding like I did, and had to have surgery. That caused me to gain some weight, got into some bad habits, but I came back senior year to play soccer again, actually made captain of the varsity team and tore my ACL in the same knee preseason. So that led to more rehab, more PT and stuff like that. And I actually that happened. And then I graduated and a lot of my friends went to go play college ball. So I was kind of in this point where I've never been in a gym. I've never had experience with any of that stuff. I had this bum knee and I had put on a lot of weight. So at that point I was probably like 205 to 210 pounds. And I started trying to figure out how I could lose weight. So I ended up going to school for business, but I just started going to the gym and I started doing like at that point in time, this is when like functional training was really big on the scene. So like everybody was doing shit on BOSU balls and balance beams and stuff. So I started doing the typical high intensity and then the balance ball stuff. And I just started watching what I ate. And at this time, and this is a good lesson for people who are just beginning. I mean, when you're like have zero knowledge, you don't need to go from 0 to 100. At that point, I really just started eating like Special K and non-fat milk, like very simple things that just naturally lowered my calories. I didn't know what I was doing, but it lowered my calories. I stopped drinking Mountain Dew and I drank Diet Pop instead, like simple stuff like that. And I started losing weight and I kind of got almost not necessarily obsessed, but it was kind of like a healthy obsession with fitness and back then muscle magazines and T Nation and blogs and all these different things. And I ended up meeting a guy at my school who was the director of the fitness program. And he mentioned to me, like, you should stop by my class. I think I could teach you a thing or two. And I was like, okay, cool. So one day I skipped my business class to go check out his class. Long story short, my business teacher didn't know a thing about starting a business and it frustrated me. So I got up and left, went to this guy's class and I just fell in love with it, man. It was a functional movement class. I ended up forging my dad's signature, changing my degree to personal training and health, went all in on this. And I still hadn't even accomplished my own weight loss. So my parents were pissed because here's this still kind of chubby kid saying he's going to make it in the fitness industry. You know, I changed my degree and I just went all in, man. I went all in on myself. I went all in on fitness, not really nutrition yet because I was really heavily into training. And that just kind of dominoed, man. I started meeting people. I started attending Perform Better seminars. I met a guy who spoke out of college who I ended up interning for. So I worked for him for 3 or 4 months for free just to get experience. He ended up hiring me and it just kind of trickled along. And I was only 18 when this all started. So I was very young. So being so young, having like a 40 to 50 pound weight loss, getting in great shape, learning, just deep diving into all this stuff, just kind of created this, like I said, health obsession with it all. It ended up leading me to a bodybuilding competition. I got on stage and I actually binged after that and didn't have a coach to support me through a reverse diet to fix my metabolism. So at that point, now I'm experiencing the hormonal downside of crash dieting, right? So I've kind of gone through it all, man. Like, and I had to learn the healthy side of things. I had to learn how to reverse diet when reverse dieting was like barely even talked about. I mean, this is years ago. And it just kind of like I said, just kept kind of trickling. It was a domino effect. And I just wanted to learn and I wanted to spread that because I had a blog. So I was just writing and just putting out content. And it kind of just, man, it just blossomed. Sometimes it's crazy for me to look back now that we've done so much, and we have clients and multiple clients in Australia and Germany and Iceland and England and all these different places around the world. So to like sit back and look at what it's manifested into, it's honestly just insane. But it all started with me just being a chubby kid with a bum knee, man. And I just wanted to
that's a crazy, amazing story, man. And it's interesting that you mentioned that because, well, first off, I actually have a very long background on soccer too. Same thing happened, ACL tear, kind of destroyed everything that I actually wanted to do in the future. So obviously I had to change everything into nutrition, which kind of led to also where I'm at today. But of course, one of the things that really resonate with me, us as dietitians, there's a lot of times like there's, people that are like diehard dietitians are like, if you're not a dietitian, you cannot provide nutrition advice. You cannot do these kinds of things. I'm against that, of course, 100%, because I'm more about providing the value and those things. So it's really interesting to kind of see how you evolved. And I've seen and we'll talk about the Boom Boom Performance System and things like that, because it's really amazing, because it's something that even dietitians don't even know how to do, which is obviously something that is fascinating. So I guess like the first thing I guess we can probably start talking about in this kind of section would be like, let's dive into nutrition, because it's obviously like the meat and potatoes of this podcast. But I know you talk a lot about this concept of nutrition hierarchies and understanding what is the kind of like things that people need to start to focus on in nutrition, because I feel like out there on, like in social media and things like that, people are just kind of focusing on kind of like what's in the surface, like the macros, or just simply focusing on, what kind of diet or meal plan do I need to get on to be able to kind of see results, but without actually diving deep into understanding what is kind of like the step process to get to that point. So what is nutrition hierarchy?
Yeah. So do you want me to just kind of break down each section of it, since it's all kind of built together?
Yeah, let's do it that way. And we'll maybe stop in each
perfect.
one of it, and if there's any questions that I may have.
Perfect. So I got to give credit where credit's due. Dr. Eric Helms is somebody I've always looked up to, somebody who I know personally, that he created the muscle and strength pyramid. So he did this for training, and then he did it for nutrition, and he kind of created this foundation that I ran off of. And I actually have his endorsement for doing my ebook the way I did it, because it's kind of my take on his theory, right? And his theory is just really, it's just backed by evidence and science, right? I think that the problem with most people when we go into nutrition, and I know a lot of RDs. I'm not an RD, but I know a lot of RDs who I greatly respect. I'm friends with. I mean, we have multiple people that we know together that are really good in this space. But then there's also, like you said, I mean, there's nutrition coaches, there's RDs, dietitians, there's doctors. There's a lot of people that are following the wrong philosophies, and they end up kind of placing people into a camp. And I think that's what I really try to push forward with the nutrition hierarchy, is that, keto is not the answer. Paleo is not the answer. Intermittent fasting is not the answer. Like, all of these different things kind of boil down to this hierarchy. And when those solutions or those camps or those diets work, they work because of the foundation of this hierarchy is in place, whether people know it or not, right? Like, if a very obese person, and I will dive into it, I know this is kind of a side tangent, but if a very obese person ends up doing a paleo diet and it works great for them, it's not necessarily paleo all the time, unless they were suffering from a serious autoimmune disease. Most likely that caused them to have a caloric deficit. So they lost weight. When we lose weight, we have better blood markers, better health tests, better hormonal panel, and now all of a sudden we get results. So it wasn't necessarily the paleo, it was the nutrition hierarchy, and this hierarchy kind of goes in the system. And before we get into the system of the hierarchy, the number one step is adherence. And I have to put this forward, and I always talk about this because Stan Efferding was just on my podcast, and he said something that was really catchy that I loved. And he said, the science is in the compliance. And I like that, because I think as coaches, when we can look at all these different things, like the science and the art of coaching is really in how do we help this person comply to the nutritional strategies that we're going to give them. Because I don't care how perfect your macros are, I don't care how set up your meal plan is, if the person can't follow it for longer than a week or two, it's not the right plan for them, right? So before even going into the science behind the nutrition hierarchy, I think the most important for people to understand is that adherence and lifestyle is the foundation below it all. Like, that's the most important thing. Once we get past that and we realize, okay, like, this is something that we can follow, or if we just want to dive into what the evidence shows us, the first thing at the base of the pyramid is energy balance. So calories in versus calories out. And as we know, no matter what magic foods you eat, no matter how many meals a day you eat, no matter what supplements you're consuming, it doesn't really matter if your energy balance is out of place. And this is kind of where we get pushback from like the paleo movement versus the if it fits your macros movement. And I'm not on either side. I don't think anybody's right because there's no one way to do anything. But the problem is, one camp says as long as we eat quote unquote clean, we'll lose weight, we'll see results, so on and so forth. And on the other side, it says it doesn't matter what you eat as long as you eat your calories. I think there's merit to both sides. I think we do need to eat quote unquote clean, like whole foods and fiber dense foods, protein dense foods, so on and so forth. But we can't ignore that calories matter, right? Like and they've done this with studies there was a study on the McDonald's diet, there was a study on the
Twinkie diet.
Yeah, showing that we can lose weight as long as we eat shit, right? Along the way. And what they noticed with those people too is even these people who, I know a lot of bodybuilders who have ate like purposely just to spite people, ate ice cream every day leading up to their prep, whether they ate a lot or a little. Sohee Lee, I want to say, is the one that ate a Snickers bar every day on her prep. And they just wanted to prove that, you know what, like I still won my pro card at a bodybuilding show and I did health tests, blood tests at the end, and it shows my cholesterol is fine, my lipids are fine, all these different things are fine, even though I was eating this quote unquote dirty food or sugar or whatever it may be. The reality is it's because their calories were under control. And we know that if we have excess body fat on our body or we're eating in a constant chronic surplus, those things are going to lead to negative health parameters aside from how much fat you have on your body, right? So I think the big key here is after we pass adherence is like the bottom of that pyramid is calories in versus calories out. So when somebody approaches me or you, we need to make sure that no matter which approach we take, those calories have to equate to whatever side of the balance we need. Are they looking to gain muscle and weight? Are they looking to maintain their weight? Or are they looking to drop their weight?
Yeah, I think it does make sense. And I think it's obviously like one of the biggest issues that I think happen right now with a lot of the trendy options. For example, let's just talk about like briefly on ketogenic diets is the fact that, well, like people look at it like this, like kind of like magic kind of solutions, or like you mentioned, obviously paleo, but without thinking like, well, if ketogenic diets is a very calorically dense diet, if you think about it, whenever you're kind of looking at like, volume of foods, because fat is obviously more calorically dense than proteins and carbohydrates. So you just eat less, but you get more calories. So of course, when you're getting 5,000 calories worth of fat, you're just not magically going to kind of torture that fat. So it makes perfect sense when you talk about like energy balance. And I love when you actually mentioned the fact that, you're following a paleo diet, maybe because you got rid of all the shit that you were eating before. And now just kind of creating that caloric restriction that just were created because you eliminated all the crap out of your diet. So obviously that's kind of like the biggest thing. So caloric energy balance is the first, then kind of like the bottom of that kind of pyramid, correct?
Right. Once we establish that foundation, now we can move on to macros. So macronutrients they're macro because they're larger than the micro, which is measured just in a smaller amount, right? Milligrams or grams. So protein, fats, and carbs, those make up our calories, as you kind of alluded to. And that's kind of the next step. And the way I look at macros, I look at them as a individualization tool, right? Like we know that calories in versus calories out ultimately is going to lead to the result we want to see. But I believe that macros are where we can really individualize the process of how we meet those macros. So you mentioned the keto diet, right? The keto, if we have our calories equated, we can go into a keto diet by going extremely high fat and lowering protein and significantly lowering carbs. And that might work for somebody. It's an individualized process. I don't see a lot of people that can adhere to a keto diet for a long period of time. But we have had clients. I've had one client that lost 80 pounds and they were just stuck. And we couldn't continually just drop their calories because I believed it was an insulin resistance issue. We kind of cycled through, and I think we're going to touch on periodization, but we've cycled through different cuts and brought back up through reverse dieting to make sure that we're not hurting their metabolism. But this person was just stuck at a point. We tested blood glucose and I was just like, you know what, I think you're insulin resistant and I think we need to break through that barrier. So we didn't drop calories any lower. What we did is we shifted him to a ketogenic diet. What that allowed him to do is fix that insulin issue. And now he broke through that plateau. Once we maintained that new level of weight loss, because he really wanted to get to 100 pounds. Once we got to that and he maintained that, then we reversed back out of it and we did a more balanced approach because he enjoyed eating carbs. But that's where macros come into play as a tool so we can individualize that caloric balance, right? Whereas if somebody like myself, I like to train really hard. My wife's Italian, so we like to eat pasta and rice, different things like that. And, I just prefer carbs. I feel good on carbs. So for me, I wouldn't say a low fat diet because I don't think anybody should be on a low fat diet, but I'm on a lower fat protocol compared to something like a ketogenic diet or a high fat because I consume a lot of carbs, but that's within my caloric parameters, just making sure I can individualize those calories to myself. So macros is kind of like the next step. And for a lot of people, if we can set up the calories, once we do that, if you're ready to take the next step, because for some people, this is already too far, right? If you've never tracked a calorie in your life, you might want to just stick with that. Let's just track calories for a while. Maybe calories and protein and let your carbs and fats kind of float around. And that's going to be enough for you to get results without being overwhelmed because now you don't have all these numbers to constantly focus on, right? But once we do get past that and we do decide to start tracking macros, I think it's important for people to use those numbers as the only number that they follow. And the reason I say that is because, as you know, like if we look at a food label, they typically round. Not only are they estimated and they're usually off, but they round up or down. So if something is 96 calories, it might say 95 or 100. If something is 83, it might say 85 or 80. At the end of the day, your calories are skewed. So I'll have clients that say, I hit my macros on the dot, but my calories are still off, right? And it never is, right? Because everything is, you can't tell me that a chicken breast is exactly 26 grams of protein, but that's besides the point. And I let them know, like, hey, like your calories are going to be rounded regardless because that's just how food labels work. That's how MyFitnessPal works. Just ignore the calories. Since we've moved past that step and we're tracking macros, just hit your macros within close range and you're fine. You don't need to be too meticulous about it.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I love the fact that the example that you provided on ketogenic diets, because that's exactly what I look at. The way I look at ketogenic diets is just a tool, in the toolbox that you can implement. And exactly what, insulin resistance, obviously it's a big issue with many, many people. Like this morning I got results from one of my clients who, they did a 2-hour glucose tolerance test and it showed which, for people listening in, that's essentially a test where you're giving 80 grams of pure like glucose, and then they measure your baseline glucose, and then they measure it at 1 hour, 2 hours, and 3 hours, and they see exactly what the curve. A normal person, like somebody without insulin resistance or like a good kind of curve, would obviously have like a good baseline below 100, and then they would rise up as soon as you get that glucose load, but then it will come back down to baseline within like 2 hours or so. And this person obviously had a number that was way higher than 100 and actually hit like 250 milliliters. Like I forgot exactly the specific measure, but then it didn't actually come down. So obviously there's an insulin resistance issue, and we worked together for a while with, a kind of like higher carbohydrate diet and not really seeing results. So now it's a moment that you can say, maybe it's a time to maybe switch gears and to see if like a higher fat, lower carbohydrate diet could improve, obviously insulin, kind of the insulin resistance that they may have, and obviously be able to kind of see better results to eventually kind of switch back into a person like would like to eat carbs again. So eventually go back into something like that. So I think a lot of people sometimes see these things as like, I had to do this for the rest of my life, and it doesn't have to be that way. So I think that's a really valid point that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to hear that stuff because there's always articles and blogs and Instagram posts and YouTube videos and even studies that show, low carb diets work better than high carb. And then the next study says it doesn't matter because as long as calories are equated, everything will equal out, which I believe is the truth. But the issue is if you take a group of overweight or obese individuals and you test a high fat versus a low carb, but we know that 75% of the people that are obese are insulin resistant, then low carb is going to lose every single time. But if you take a group of individuals who are lean and just want to get shredded and we test them both, I don't think you're going to see any difference. Exactly. Right? So, and I think it's really important for people to understand that. And again, like you said, it's a tool. And that's, if you're looking for a good coach, you want to look for somebody that explains it this way because good coaches use all these things as tools. Intermittent fasting is the same exact way. I always get, what's your opinion on intermittent fasting? And I'm like, it's great if that fits your lifestyle. I wake up hungry. I like to eat breakfast. That's my lifestyle. When I travel though, I usually skip breakfast because I know, like we were just talking. I was at Jason's mastermind this weekend. I knew I was going to go out to dinner. I knew he was going to have some wine, and I knew he was, because he orders this every time I'm with him, butter cake. He's obsessed with it. So I knew we were going to end up having some butter cake on the table and I wanted to enjoy that. So I chose to skip breakfast. I ate a high protein, high veggie, low fat lunch to save some calories. And then
You budget
had
it
whatever I
out for the
wanted.
rest of the day. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the whole point of macros, right? Now, is that a healthy move to make every single day so I can fit wine and butter cake in my dad all the time? Probably not. But I also don't go to Arizona and hang out with Jason every weekend. So I think that it's important for people to look at all of these tools. If you have digestive issues, like something came up, okay, maybe we do go paleo for a week or two and try to kind of eliminate foods to try to just replenish your gut, your microbiome, fix the digestive issue. And then when we do fix it, then we can integrate those foods back and see what was causing the problem. Again, paleo, it's a tool, right? So I think it's just so important for people to look at all these nutritional strategies and understand that it's just a tool in your tool belt versus a one way or a one all be all type of thing.
Interesting stuff, man. So what would be the next step after we move on from macros?
Right. So the next step is micros. So micronutrients, which are just going to be vitamins and minerals, as you know. So basically, the way I kind of look at this is micronutrients. So the foods we eat, food quality, basically, for people out there listening. Like we've already kind of gone through food quantity, and that's going to determine your performance, your energy demands, your recovery. A lot of what is going to determine your hormonal and your nervous system output is going to generally be in that quantity, that calories and macros section as well. But after that, we get into micros. These things aren't going to dramatically change your body composition because there's no you can eat cayenne pepper and your metabolism speeds up and you burn fat. I remember that was a big thing back in the day. This stuff is just kind of black magic. It doesn't really happen, right? But if we want to make sure that some of our hormone processes are properly functioning, our digestion is properly functioning, our skin health, our eye health, our some of our insulin sensitivity, our digestion, like the small things that are very individualized that make up our body, make up our processes, make up our systems, and do influence our health quite a bit in the long term, we do need to be aware and focused on these micronutrients. And I think it's becoming more and more prevalent because we had a big time where if it fits your macros was everything. And I think people are starting to fade away from that because now a lot of those people that bought into that and have been following it for 5+ years are starting to have gut health issues. They're starting to have, they're aging faster. Their skin is cracking. Their hair is changing. Like all these little things that they didn't think were going to happen over the long run, I believe are starting to happen, or we're just getting more science that's showing that we do need to prioritize micronutrients. But again, it's not a big enough rock to dramatically change our body composition, dramatically change our performance, or anything like that. But it comes next. So
what do you think that's happening though? You mean by the if it's your macro type of movement, I think is more because of the fact that just people were just focused too much on the macronutrients and not really thinking and paying too much attention to the small stuff and the food quality, and just kind of focusing too much on the quantity part?
100%. So I think that a lot of those people were there's the flexible dieters like myself. I believe I flexible diet the proper way where people always laugh when I say this, but I love ketchup. I've always loved ketchup as a kid. So for me, flexible dieting is getting a healthier ketchup that's still got sugar in it and fitting that into my day-to-day plan because I eat whole foods. I eat whole eggs with some ketchup. I eat veggies and chicken and steak and then a little A1 sauce, something like that. That's flexible dieting. That's not going to hurt you. But people were taking it as far as they could, where they would drink protein shakes and eat fiber gummies all day and then have a big splurge of In-N-Out burgers and fries. And it would fit their macros and they would get lean, but their health is going to suffer from that. And we're just starting to see more and more of this, right? Sodium is a good example of micronutrients. If you deplete your body of sodium, you are not going to recover. Your thyroid's going to take a hit. Your nervous system's going to take a hit. Your hydration is going to go to shit. Your performance is going to drop. Your muscles aren't going to get as pumped. So people, and that was a big thing when Mrs. Dash came out. There was this low salt phase, but salt is a micronutrient, right? It's sodium. We need that in our diet to perform well. If you take out salt today, for the next week, you'll probably be fine. But eventually, it's going to start to bite you in the ass. So these are the little things that we need to be aware of if we want to perform and optimize our body in the long term. So I think that it's just becoming more prevalent. There was the big If It Fits Your Macros movement. Keto came out. Paleo came out. The autoimmune paleo diet came out. Then we had the vertical diet from Stan Efferding, which heavily focused on micronutrients, and people are getting jacked. There's a lot of people kind of pushing forward this more, and I think it's a good thing. But again, it comes down to knowing it's not any one of these things. It's all of these things in this specific hierarchy order.
Yeah, so it's obviously building up to that, and I think that's definitely very, very important. So I agree. Quality, I think, is really important when it comes down to this. So then we have so far like energy balance. We go on to macronutrients. We go into like the upper scale in the pyramid, like micronutrients, and I think there's still a few other left that are kind of like on top.
Yeah, so for most people listening, this is kind of where I say you can kind of just stop now and you'll be fine, right? Like the next couple things you actually don't need, but they can come into play when we get to that last 5%. And that last 5% can be you're a CrossFitter who's training twice a week. I have some really high level competitive CrossFitters that do tournaments or competitions where they literally have like 2 or 3 workouts a day for 3 days. That's when this shit comes into play. Or a bodybuilder about to get on stage and we want to optimize certain things, or if you have digestive health. When we're kind of in that 5% of people, this is where the fourth tier comes in, and that's meal timing and frequency. So basically nutrient timing. But when are you timing your meals? When are you not eating your meals? So how long are you fasting overnight? How frequently? So how many meals per day are you eating? This is when this comes into play. And it's just such a small piece of the pie, I would say like it's the most important thing with this is looking at adherence. We know from studies that like the old myth used to be 6 meals a day, smaller meals kind of strokes the fire on your metabolism. It's going to speed that up. Well, we realize that metabolism is ran by your energy expenditure. So how are you training, your age, your hormonal profile, and then most importantly, your daily total intake. So I don't care if you have 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 meals a day. If your calories are equated, it's not going to make a big difference. The big thing here is what can you actually adhere to? Because if I tell you, like 5 meals a day is probably going to feel your workouts best because of the way your training is set up, so on and so forth, but your work schedule doesn't allow you to eat that many times, it's not going to work. So we have to draw it back and go, okay, how many meals can you eat per day? 3? Perfect. Let's do with that. Just hit your macros. The one thing I will say here is after we kind of move past that adherence standpoint of like what nutrient timing and what frequency is going to work for you personally, the only other thing I would say is like, if you have extreme issues with, let's say, cortisol, I would recommend nutrient timing specifically around your workouts because we know that cortisol is going to be higher in you because you're a high stress individual, and then you're going to train and ramp that up even higher. We want to mitigate that cortisol response after training with some carbohydrates and some protein right away, because you might not get to a meal 2 or 3 hours later, which we know is fine. Like the anabolic window myth is kind of a myth. It's not fully true.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a high stress individual, if you're a high stress athlete, we might want to blunt that cortisol response. So it might be important for you. So things like that, or for weight loss, we were talking about insulin resistance. We know you're more insulin sensitive around your workouts. You might want to place your carbohydrates around your workout if you're easily adhering to your caloric intake. So when we start going past that, we can kind of take it a step further and start timing our nutrients depending on your lifestyle, your goals, so on and so forth. And the only thing I would add to that is from like a evidence and a science-based perspective is there has been some studies that show not necessarily how many meals you eat, but if you eat the same amount of meals. So if you tell me I want to eat 3 meals a day, perfect. Let's stick with that. And if you can consistently do that every day, we've seen health benefits from actually you burn more calories per day. So they've noticed people's energy expenditure is higher if you stick with your meal frequency, as well as your insulin sensitivity does improve. So rather than me telling you this many meals is the perfect meal, it's more like how many meals a day works for you? Okay, cool. That's the perfect meal plan for you as long as you can stick to it, because when you stick to it consistently, your body kind of gets used to it and you can utilize your energy a little bit better, I believe. And that's when we start seeing these health improvements.
Yeah, I think it's also the key word here. Also, like you mentioned at the beginning, was adherence, and I had to also work with a CrossFitter in Argentina, and he's a competitor. He trains 3 hours a day, and then there's another guy in Luxembourg also with the same. But this guy is like about 65 years old, and it's amazing what that guy can do. He can probably train harder than I can. But it's really interesting because, like for example, this guy in Argentina, he's on like a 600 grams of carbs, type of like this, because of the amount of training. Because we're trying to put on weight, it's been hard for him. So imagine like how can you possibly do that in 3 meals? Which for some people are like, well, because that's the first thing that he told me. He's like, well, like I heard like the meal timing is not really that important. I don't need to be consuming every 6 meals. And I'm like, great. So let's get to 600 grams of carbs and figure out how you're going to fit all that in only 3 meals. So of course, like it really comes down to like, well, what can you do and what's going to work for you, and to be able to kind of make it work that way. So I think that's very important. isn't it?
Really, really good point. And I have multiple clients like that as well. And it goes both ways, right? Like if somebody is dieting and they're on a lower calorie limit, you might want to go towards the 3 meals per day because then they have bigger meals. They feel more satiated.
Yeah.
If you give them a bunch of little tiny meals, they might not get satiated. And then, like you said, I have people that it's hard for them to eat enough. And at those people, we do want to break it up into more meals per day because on top of it just being hard to eat that much, I believe that I don't think there's any one specific number, but I do believe that there's a threshold of how much your body, like carbs, your body can take in one sitting. You don't want to push that to where you're eating 200 grams of carbs per meal. I personally don't believe that's healthy from an insulin standpoint, from a body comp standpoint, but even from a digestive standpoint, that's just a lot of work on your gut every single few hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I think that's key to understand depending on the person and the adherence and whatever they can actually make it work. And I guess that the last one that you mentioned, kind of like the tip of the pyramid would be, again, it kind of like optional. I think you and I look at it the same way, optional depending on the person, which is supplementation, which is what's kind of like your take on that? And what kind of like typical, just like kind of like the surface, not going too much in depth into this, what kind of supplements you feel like it's something that, depending on the person you're working with, may be deemed appropriate, just to kind of fill in the gaps?
Yeah, I think it's funny when I talk about supplements because people expect like sports supplements, and it's usually like, you know what, like majority of people should probably be taking a fish oil or some kind of omega-3 supplementation because it's just not enough people get omega-3s. The omega-3 to 6 ratio, as you know, is just kind of out of whack in our country. But that also depends. You know, if you have a client living in Japan and they eat a ton of raw fish or just fish in general, their omega-3 is better because they're getting a lot of fatty fish. So it kind of depends, but I think that's a big one. Vitamin D is a big one. If you have any vegan listeners or vegetarians, possibly B12, zinc, stuff like that. But for the most part, if you're taking fish oil or you're eating fatty fish, salmon a couple times a week, you're pretty much got your bases covered. If you get out in the sun every day, you got vitamin D covered. There's really nothing else in my mind that's needed unless it's, again, in that 5%. If you have extreme gut issues and you need to take probiotics or digestive enzymes or bone broth, collagen, things like that, that's when those things can come into play. But you should be able to get everything you need through food. It just might take a little bit more planning on your part.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, I think it really depends. But I wanted to ask you one important question, which is, do you think at some point, like supplementation sometimes is important to kind of fill in the gaps for somebody starting off? Like, I'm going to give you an example. Somebody comes to you, you know, very low vegetable intake, very low micronutrient intake, nothing at all. And you're kind of starting to try to build that nutrition foundation for that person. Do you think, for example, just to kind of fit in like the needs for that person and just kind of get them with a really healthy baseline, for example, a multivitamin could fit into like that kind of bottom line until you actually get that point to I guess like you get that person to a point where like, okay, you can get this from food. You don't really need to take a multivitamin in this case. What is your
100%. I 100% agree. And the same thing with like a green supplement, right? Greens powder supplement, it's very similar to a multivitamin. Same exact idea. And I do that exact thing and I do believe in it. And I would be lying if I said I don't recommend supplements to people or if I don't take any supplements personally. I do. The theory behind the pyramid is that you can't worry about supplements until you worry about the rest. So I think the big key for here is like, don't rely on supplements if you're not worried about how much food you're consuming or eating whole foods. But like you said, when we're starting people out, it's about habits, right? So for some people, if I throw this pyramid at them, I'm like, hey, calories are the most important thing. Macros are next. So we need to track those and dial those in and hit them every day. They're overwhelmed. So for a lot of people, it's like, how can we give them things like that? How can we eat cleaner food, even though that's higher on the pyramid, and just kind of, for lack of better terms, trick them into a better caloric balance, right? They don't need to track them as long as I, as a coach, am aware of where those calories are at. So I 100% agree. I think to fill in the gaps for certain people, it's very necessary. And there's a lot of people where you might come to me and you commit to doing much better on your diet, but I still know you've been deficient in vitamin D. So even if you're eating whole foods a lot, we're still going to start on a vitamin D supplementation. We're still going to start with a multivitamin. We might add in little things like if you're performing a lot. I love creatine. It's a very studied supplement. I think anybody who wants to build muscle or strength should probably take creatine. It's great for brain cognition and function as well.
Yeah.
So there's definitely ones that fill in the gap. And by no means do I think supplements are useless because I use them. I just, the point of the pyramid is to educate people on what's truly important so they understand how they should approach kind of like the whole grand picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think if they look at it like you said, as a whole, like they look at it like as with a macro, perspective, looking at, okay, this is how we're going to approach this, and this is exactly what I want to get you to, but it's a step process. And I think that's the part where a lot of people just don't quite always like look at it that way. Like, because just they look at nutrition, and I'm sure like you get this all the time. People coming to you, they apply for your coaching programs, and they come to you and they say, it's like, what's the diet? What's the fix that it's going to happen? Not having the perspective or like kind of like the reality. Well, we had to kind of give them a reality check. It's like, this is going to take some time. So that's like the biggest part of that when it comes down to it, is kind of teaching them how to get to like the tip of like the pyramid, but the process that it's going to get to be able to kind of get there. So I think that's important, which also kind of like I wanted to talk about, because I know this is something else that really resonated when I was reading some of your articles, some of your blog posts, which is the term of periodization, which is something that I have learned. I'm a certified strength and conditioning coach, so I did study training periodization a lot. And, and this is the kind of like conversation that you hear in weight rooms and things like that, and like sports teams. But I have never actually heard about somebody talking about this stuff within kind of like general population. Of course, you work with many athletes, but like implemented into general population, specifically nutrition periodization. And I had a really interesting podcast with the head of sports nutrition for UFC, and he's the only guy besides you that I've actually heard talking about this stuff, which is essentially like, well, I'm going to let you explain it, but the ability to be able to look at nutrition as a year-long program, and not necessarily as a like, here's your little plan for a month and hope you see results. So question here is like, what is nutrition periodization? And we'll go into like, how is it that you implement it with average people that are just trying to like improve their eating habits and trying to get results?
Yeah. So it's unfortunately not a very talked about thing. And it's actually more simple than a lot of people realize. I think it's looking, like you said, looking at a person's nutrition from a macro level. A lot of people come into a coaching program and they say in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, whatever their goal is, I want to get to this point. Okay, well, what's the diet after the diet? Because if we create a deficit and we start going down into that hole where we're going to get you lean, you're going to be in a metabolically compromised position. At this point, your calories are low, your metabolism has slowed down, some of your hormonal and nervous system processes, they have slowed down, and that's okay. It's not necessarily healthy, but that's part of chasing a goal. I've done photo shoots, I've done a physique competition, bodybuilding competition, like that's part of it, right? We know that. It's just like a football player. There's injuries are part of it. You might get injured. So we go through this process, but people just need to be aware of, okay, where are you going to go the month, 2 month, 3 month after that? Whether you maintain that weight or not. Maybe for some people that means gaining an extra pound, because if you get really lean, you probably shouldn't sustain that for a long period of time. And that kind of factors into this periodization as well, kind of periodizing your goals. But the process of nutritional periodization is just understanding that we can't keep you in a chronic deficit for a long period of time. Same reason why you can't stay in a chronic surplus for a long period of time. If somebody is trying to build muscle and they just stay with a 500 to 1,000 calorie surplus all year long, that's when health issues arise. That's when fat accumulation rises. That's where digestive problems possibly occur from eating too much food, insulin resistance, so on and so forth. But again, if we can factor in mini cuts throughout that process where we pull calories back, we change things, that's going to factor into nutritional periodization. I look at it also as metabolic flexibility. If someone's constantly 24/7 throughout the year following a high carb approach, to me, I think it would be advantageous for your body from a health standpoint to practice some metabolic flexibility, which is where you periodize some lower carb, higher fat approaches in there, just to get your body used to multiple fuel sources, get higher nutrient quality, possibly, again, get that insulin benefit. So nutritional periodization is kind of looking at things from a bigger scheme and setting up your nutrition in waves to make sure that you're not chronically doing any one thing for an extended period of time. And then once we kind of have that foundation of why we're doing this, we can look at events going on throughout the year. So if you are dieting for a wedding or a vacation, those things factor in. You have to set up your metabolism to be able to not rapidly regain weight after that. And that's part of it. If you're an athlete, are you prioritizing nutritional periodization to make sure in season you are fueled with a high carb approach? Maybe off season, when you are doing deloads and tapering down training, you spend some time at a higher fat approach, optimize your hormones, your nervous system, both which highly function off fat, just to kind of heal your body while you're trying to recover in that off season. And then as you go into the in season, you start ramping up carbs, lowering fat again, which is an approach a lot of CrossFitters do at a high level. So It really just depends. I think in a simple form, nutritional periodization is kind of just looking at things from a bigger scheme and just knowing like I have a lot of things going on in the year. I can't diet 24/7 in either direction. And if I'm going to sustain the result I want to achieve, I have to look at this from a bigger point of view.
Okay, that's actually something fun here. So because I know a lot of people always kind of like they listen to this and they're like, okay, like I get it, like I understand this whole thing, but now let's kind of put like an example here, like an actual person, and let's put him through like in a very brief way. I want you to maybe talk about what would you do with this person with the information that I provide. So let's just say that this is a guy, like, I usually talk about my ideal client. His name is Juan, and he's just coming to you, and it's right now this podcast is releasing on January, so it's for perfect time. And he comes to you and he says like, Cody, like, dude, I'm getting married in November, and I'm actually going on a trip with my fiance in, let's say, June or something like that. So those are like bigger events that I have this year. I want to look like freaking awesome by the time that I go into this trip, but of course, like I want to maintain it in order for me to be prepared for my wedding in November. So what are we going to do?
Perfect situation. So the good thing about this, and I want people to note first off the bat, he came in January and he has all the way till June, which means we have like 6 months almost. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important for people to realize that, because a lot of people are like, all right, my wedding's in 2 months, let's get after it. And it's like, okay, we can try, but it's probably smart to set it up. So the way I look at that, you can go 2 routes, and it goes down to, again, adherence. So the way I certain people's personality type will actually adhere better if you're a little bit more strict and aggressive. So some people really want to get after it. They don't want to be babied. They don't want to go slow. And if you give things to them too slow, then they're going to leave. So for some people, if he's one of those aggressive types, I might actually diet him a little bit harder, a little bit faster, get him ready in, say, 3 months, and then spend at least a week or 2 at a diet break to kind of rehab from that metabolic downward spiral, and then go back into the diet. So we can kind of set up these diet breaks, which can be anywhere between 7 to 14 days. Technically they can even be 4 days, but for people listening, the point of a diet break is to boost up leptin and ghrelin, which is going to help speed up the metabolism. It's going to help your nervous system. You're going to get a pump in the gym. You're just going to feel psychologically better, because they've done studies that a 1-day refeed just isn't long enough. You need a minimum of 48 hours to spike these hormones that help your metabolism. So it's a great tactic to use for a long-term fat loss plan. So if I have a client that needs to get ready by June, I might go hard for 12 weeks trying to get him ready. And whether he's ready by then or not, it's okay, because we can go into a diet break for as long as needed to get him feeling better, make sure we avoided any hormonal adaptations, because we're tracking his stress, his fatigue, his mood, his cravings, all these things along the way. And you can kind of be proactive about these things. So as I'm dieting him in that period, let's say we hit 12 weeks and he feels great, he has no downward spiral of any of his hormone stuff, I might push that to 14 or 16 weeks. But if we hit 12 weeks and I notice his fatigue is getting higher, his stress is getting higher, his sleep is getting poor, then I might say, hey, we got to pull back now. So we're going to do a diet break to rehab those, to fix those, to boost them up a little bit. After that 1 to 2 week period, all those biomarkers are going up. At that point, we go, okay, we're going to go back into this diet phase for another 12 weeks. He gets lean enough by June. We do about a 1 to 2 week diet break through his vacation. And then when he gets back, we kind of can assess, right? Like now we have 3 months till his wedding. Let's assess, see where you're at now. Do we need to get you leaner? Are you good where you're at? Because if you're good where you're at, we're going to reverse diet you into the wedding so we can maintain where you're at and actually bring up calories so you can sustain it. So that's a good example of not taking super long periods of time in either way, but actually looking at it from a standpoint of like, okay, in 12 to 16 weeks, I know for a fact we are going to do a diet break. I don't care if you lose 10 pounds or 20 pounds. We are dieting at that point because everybody's rate of loss is going to be different. But if you're in a caloric deficit, it doesn't matter how much you lost, you are still going to get fatigue from dieting. And at that point, we need to integrate those diet breaks. So that would be a good example of how I would approach that.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people sometimes come in and like, I should have also added to say, for example, that the guy came in like, he was like, he did like, for example, like an entire month of like this crazy detox and like super low calorie, like shut down all his like hormones and like, you know, like you mentioned something about like, you know, reverse dieting and things like that. We talked a lot about that in the podcast. And so that's obviously really interesting to kind of see that at like a macro level, because people don't ever look at it that way. They never see like, you know, this is going to take me like an entire year to be able to accomplish this. Maybe it will take you to get the physique that you want 3 months, but then it's like one of the things that I literally kind of like want to write down is like, what's the diet after the diet? Like that, something that you mentioned, because nobody really wonders what they're going to do. They just want the quick result, but then what's going to happen after? You're going to gain everything back because you're going to go back to old habits. That's, you finish your meal plan because you didn't really have a strategy post doing that. And I think that's the benefit of coaching and being able to kind of have somebody hold you accountable through the process. So I think that's really powerful.
100%, man. I think accountability is the biggest key with reverse dieting. It's tough for anyone to increase calories and to expect a little weight gain or anything like that and worry about that, right? And keep that accountability. Because once we finish a diet and we start bringing calories up, there is the chance of weight gain temporarily, and you need to kind of push through that period of time, which can be hard to do. So I think that's important. And just for another example, for the people listening, like if somebody did come to me in that position, or a good example is I'm going to post it tonight. I haven't posted it yet, but when we're recording this, it's a Tuesday, so it'll be a Transformation Tuesday. But a client came to me a while back, and she had done, I would consider her like a chronic paleo dieter. So she was following chronic paleo dieting. She was training really hard, so she was under eating for a while. She wasn't where she wanted to be body composition wise. And I told her, like, when you come to me that way, like, we have to spend time increasing your metabolism, speeding it up, and increasing your calories. So we spent probably 6-7 months reverse dieting and bringing her calories up almost twofold. Got her to a point where she felt good. She wasn't at her leanest body composition yet, but she didn't gain a ton of weight, if any at all. It actually helped a lot. She was kind of like a really good responder to a reverse. And we actually kept her there for like 2 months. We kept her at that new caloric intake, her new maintenance, kind of resetting her body fat level, resetting her metabolic set point. We kept it there for 2 months to let her body get used to it. And then I felt comfortable taking her into a little bit of a caloric deficit to lose some fat. So we went up, bringing her calories. We maintained that. And then I actually dropped it down, and now she's diced. She's super lean. I'm going to post a picture tonight. She looks great and she feels better. And now she's been able to get leaner on way more calories than she was in the past, because we took this longer process. And I looked at things from a 8 to 10 month standpoint and said, hey, this is exactly what we're going to do. It might be off by some weeks or months because we never know how your metabolism is going to respond. But in general, this is the curve that we're looking for. And I can't diet you until I get you to that point first. So for her periodization, it was less changes, and it was just more of one big curve up and then down a little bit. But it worked really well.
And that's really interesting, because a lot of, particularly, well, men and women, but women just statistically more prevalent. It's just the fact that, so it's a typical thing that they ask, like, wait, you're going to increase my calories? Like, is that what you're planning on doing? I'm like, just trust me on this process. Like, we're going to do it that way. And it's what you mentioned, is like your weight's not changing, or like there's small fluctuations. And they happen to, again, you know, some of my clients as well. It's like, you know, listen, you're consuming 500, like 600, 700, 800 calories more than when you started, and your weight actually remained the same. So like, how can you explain that? And they're like, oh, well, that makes sense. And your body composition is actually improving. So it's like it's understanding how metabolism works, and that science behind it, right?
Yeah. So the cool thing with that too is she's very, very similar. She weighed 148 pounds when she started with me, and she's weighing like 145, 146. So only 2 pounds down. But when you look at the pictures, it's dramatic difference. And what helped her like along the way is we took regular progress pictures. She tracks her stress, her sleep, her mood. We track the weights in the gym, so we know she's progressing. We know she's building muscle. If she didn't have all those other metrics, she would probably lose her mind, because she would not be seeing the scale move, and she's quote unquote paying me to lose weight. It's like, no, you're paying me to get healthy and lose fat. If we can lose fat, screw the weight. We need to kind of, you know what I mean? We got to mark these, like Jason Phillips coined this term, but the physiological, or the physical follows the physiological. So if we can change these physiological measurements through your hormones, your nervous system, all these things, I promise you the physical is going to change eventually too. We just have to lock in this physiological stuff first, and it kind of just happens afterwards.
I love that, dude. That's awesome. So we're kind of coming to the end of the podcast, but I kind of wanted to ask you, and some of the questions that I kind of had here prepared was just, it's the beginning of the year. It's, people are starting to figure it out, or they're trying to figure out, what am I going to do this year? I have all these new resolutions, all these goals, all these purposes that I'm trying to obviously kind of accomplish this year. For people listening to this, trying to kind of lost a little bit, not knowing exactly what to do, what would you tell them?
Start small. I think that, we're talking about a lot of cool shit on this podcast, periodization and calories and macros and keto and all these different things. And they're all strategies and tools. But don't forget the first thing we touched on, which was adherence, right? Like when I first started and I lost 50 pounds, 45, 50 pounds, which was a lot for somebody. I'm 5'9", 5'10". And a lot of people don't realize that I was overweight like that. Like I lost a good chunk of weight. It wasn't any of this stuff that I'm talking about. When I first started, it was what I could currently adhere to at the time. I was 18 years old. I was going to school. I was working 2 jobs. I couldn't adhere to tracking macros and all that stuff. I picked the best. I was a grocery store clerk. I would pick the best and cheapest option that I could heat up in the break room to eat for dinner because I worked nights at this place, right? I would pick the healthiest thing at the gas station when I was walking to school. Like, that's what I could adhere to. So at the time, it was like a muscle milk, like a bag of almonds and beef jerky, right? Like I wasn't looking at macros. I just looked and was like, okay, that's better than a candy bar. It's better than Doritos. I'm going to go with that. So I think for a lot of people listening, take the next easiest step and just kind of keep going in that process. Like there's no reason to rush. Like, yes, it's New Year's. We want to get after it. But at the end of the day, and this is actually a real statistic, 80% of people who set New Year's resolutions fail. And that's scary. 80% is the vast majority of people who set goals do not reach their goals. And I think the reason they don't is because they're in too much of a hurry and they're setting too high of standards for too short period of time. If you want to get shredded by the end of the year, great. Start with the easiest step today. And maybe that's more steps. Maybe it's standing more than sitting. Maybe it's drinking more water. Just do that one little easy step, master that shit. And once you do, then integrate the next thing. Because if you do that for the next 3 months, you will be tracking macros, following intermittent fasting on a strength program, and so on and so forth, and being able to use these strategies and tools because you've built the sustainability behind them. You've built the foundation of adherence behind them that allows you to do so. So I think the best advice for me I can give is just take the next easiest step.
Yeah, dude, I call that the overhaul mindset. Like you want to do everything at once when the year starts, and you just want to you end up doing just absolutely nothing at the end of the month because of the fact that you just got so overwhelmed. So that's powerful. So tell us a little bit about the Boom Boom Performance System, because I know and you can talk briefly about this so people find out a little bit more about you and what you have going on right now, so people can kind of find you and kind of reach out to you and connect with you.
Yeah, so everything we do is at boomboomperformance.com. We have a podcast, the Instagram videos, blogs, everything's on there, programs. What the method or the system is, it's hard to put a name on it because like I've been alluding to is like it's just so individualized. We have people on paleo and keto and not tracking macros, and people tracking macros, and we have athletes and we have moms and dads. It's kind of turned into this thing that we do have a plan for everybody because we individualize it to the person. And I think it takes people longer to grow, especially a few years back. It wasn't as popular to be a very individualized coach, right? Like everything was, you had to have a name brand behind it or a fad or a title or something to get it to stand out in the media. Fortunately, now there's a lot of people that are rising up that are individualized coaches as well. But that's what it is. It's, we do work with a lot of macros, but that's not for everybody. So we kind of meet you where you're at. We have multiple coaches on the team. So myself, I personally only do training and nutrition right now. So if you want to work with me, there's a wait list and it's basically you have to do both. Like I take over everything. If not, you work with my team, and we have a couple different coaches on staff that kind of, they're not niched in their own area, but I kind of place people with them on purpose. Caroline's very, she got shredded for this photo shoot we did together, and she's not a competitive CrossFitter, but she works with competitive CrossFitters. So I like to kind of put those extremist people towards her. Courtney's got a family. She works great with habits, consistency, accountability, relationship building. So I like to put lifestyle people with her. And we kind of just divvy it up that way, but we kind of have a thing for everybody. And besides that, man, it's just content. I'm obsessed with creating content. I love Instagram. I love podcasts.
The infographics are so freaking powerful, dude. I save all the ones that you post, man. Those are awesome.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that a lot. It's funny because it turned into my passion. And actually, that's how my online business started. So I created a website when I was 18, going to college, just talking about my journey. And at that point, online coaches were not a thing. It wasn't possible to do, or we didn't know. But I looked up to people like Jason Ferrugia and Nate Green and Christian Thibodeau and John Russin and people that were like I'm actually friends with now, which is humbling to say, but they were putting out information online for free, and I didn't really know how they were making a living off of it, but I wanted to do what they were doing. I thought it was so cool that so many people were reaching them, and they were helping me change my life. So that was always my goal, man. And then eventually somebody asked me to write them a program, and they lived in New York, and it kind of sparked an idea, and I was like, wait, I can probably do this.
You can
so it kind of built on that.
Nice.
Exactly. Man. So then I started building the business, but yeah, man, I just love content. So like everything we do is either individualized coaching or it's just content, whether that's ebooks or podcasts or blogs or whatever it may be.
Awesome, man. So I'm going to make sure, guys, like for you listening in, to link up all those things. So the podcast, big fan of that, and like the website and everything for Cody, so you can reach out to him and you can connect with him. So Cody, the last thing we have on here is just going to be it's a segment that I stole from Tim Ferriss called Rapid Fire Questions. So it's just simple 4 questions I'm going to ask you. You just need to reply whatever first thing comes to your mind, just to kind of cool things off before we let it go.
Love it.
Okay? All right. First question goes in. What's your favorite exercise? Go.
Chin-ups.
Okay. Nice. Weighted or non-weighted?
You know what? So lately I've been actually really into non-weighted. There was a period of time where I was like really motivated to try to like chin up the heaviest dumbbell I could, but I've been really into and I don't know if this is because I had a daughter and I feel like I'm getting old, but just form. Like I've been really into like slowing my chin ups way down, following my scapula move throughout the movement, because a lot of people do a chin up and they don't actually understand depression and elevation of their scapula, and they end up kind of what we call gliding on their lats, and they're pinching their shoulders. So I've been really focused on just like body weight stuff and just really slowing it down. But yeah, chin-ups came to mind first. I don't know why.
Nice. That's a good one. A book that you'd like to recommend to people, whether it's business, nutrition, anything that you feel like it's either changed your life or you feel like it's something that people should read.
Can I do a couple?
Yeah.
This one, can I cheat? This one, all right.
Yeah.
The first 3 that come to mind that have changed my life the most. Number 1 is The Alchemist. It's a fictional story, but it's about kind of, I love it, man. I've read that book probably 6 times. It's such a good book to find your path and get clarity on what you want to achieve, and to be motivated to actually do it and just believe that you can do it. Number 2 would be The Go-Giver. The Go-Giver is another fictional story, but it's just so powerful, explaining the process of how giving to others is probably really the best way to do anything in life. The more you give, the more you will receive, and you don't have, but you have to do it without asking for anything in return. I think that's the big key there. And then number 3 would be The Leader Who Had No Title. Another fictional story, but just teaches you a lot about life, teaches you a lot about the people around you, who's watching, who's not watching, how you act in your energy when nobody's watching, just everything about your persona and how you go about day-to-day life. It's a super powerful book.
Nice, man. I'm going to make sure to link up to all those 3 in the show notes as well, because I think those are really helpful. A lot of people are always asking me, what can they read now? So that's really interesting. 3 out of 4 would be a podcast, radio show, or anything that, besides obviously yours, besides mine, a podcast that you would recommend for people to listen to, because it's just powerful content for them to learn.
The first one, like, since we're doing rapid fire.
You can do 2 out of 3.
Okay. I would definitely say Joe Rogan. And I'm very selective with who I listen to on his podcast, because there's some people I'm just not interested in listening to. But he has some guests on there that just have amazing stories. And Joe Rogan is a very, very smart individual. Like, that guy is just,
he knows everything
so much. Dude, it's insane. So I'm definitely going to recommend his. This is tough. I would go with Mind Pump. I don't listen to it as much as I used to, but I would throw that out there because they were one of the first podcasts I ever actually listened to and thought that it could be like a lucrative thing. And they're just funny guys. I think that's a really good podcast for people to check out. And then my third one, I would go with, I've been really into The Art of Manliness.
Oh, lately. Dude, that's a good one. That's actually one of the first podcasts I ever listened to. Really,
I just discovered this actually, so it's really good. He had a guy on there that wrote the book, and I'm trying to get him on mine. The Morning Routine or something like that.
Yeah, The Miracle Morning.
Yeah, there you go. So a lot of good guests on that one. Just an interesting podcast. So those are the 3 I'd go with.
Awesome, great ones. Last question, and the funniest one would be, if you're stranded on a desertic island and you were actually be able to choose only one food to have for the rest of your life on there, what would that be?
Does it get a condiment or no condiment?
No condiments, just whatever. Well, actually, you can just say whatever. It's like people like said the weirdest thing. Dude, I think Justin Murphy. He actually said, what is it that he said? A Pokeball. So like there's all kinds of weird stuff in there. So you can say anything, honestly.
Oh, that's actually a clever answer.
It is a clever answer.
You know what? I'm gonna stick to the rules and say whatever came to mind first. The first thing that came to mind is a baked sweet potato with grass-fed butter on it. I could literally eat those every day. Just a nice big sweet potato with grass-fed butter and salt. I'm good.
Awesome, man. That's a great one. That's awesome. Cool, man. So I think we got pretty much everything all covered for today. You already kind of talk about how people can find you. So it's been, dude, a pleasure. Definitely would like to have you back in the future to chat more about other kinds of things. Like there's definitely an area that I want to cover more, which is actually training specifically, which we don't talk too much in this podcast. It's mostly, nutrition related, but definitely like to bring you back and kind of chat a little bit more about that. So thanks a lot, man, for being here today.
Anytime, man. Thanks for having me on.
You have been listening to Viva Nutrition Radio. Couple of things before you take off. If you enjoyed this episode, please, I would love to get your feedback. So feel free to drop down a review and I will be forever grateful. Also, if you like this podcast, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We have it on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play. And lastly, if you would like to receive a freebie from me, make sure you sign up for our newsletter at www.vive-nutrition.com. See you guys in the next episode. Ciao, ciao.